Awesome. So thanks everyone for being here again for another weekly coaching. Hope you guys are ready to burn some neurons and potentially learn a little bit more about poker today. I'm gonna wait just one more minute for people to just get into the call and then we can start. I see familiar faces. So the people that come to every night to every call. So that's really nice. And today I prepared a call with the focus on something that has been requested. It was requested for the third time to meet recently, which is to give a little bit more focus on exploitative play. And you guys are going to see that, funnily enough, in order to cover exploitative play, we're going to have to do a lot of theory work and try to understand theory in the first place. So this is going to be nice to tackle both things at the same time. And as usual, feel free to interact with me through the microphone and unmute yourself and talk. I think it gets more interactive this way. If you prefer to interact through the chat, that's also no problem. All right, I see here we have 12 people. So we can already start. I'm going to share my screen and you guys can tell me if you can see it. Can you see it? Yes, all right. So here I have replayer from Hold Manager, and I selected one specific hand that I played recently. So I played this in the 5th, so it was 6 days ago. And I think this hand is going to be really, really useful at illustrating how you can get better at exploiting your opponents. Okay, so I'm going to replay the hand. You guys are going to see how it was played. And then we're going to start the discussion by obviously spotting in which street do you guys think that I followed a more exploitative approach. After that, we're going to discuss why do you guys think it is the case that I chose that option. And once we are done with that, we're going to explore why do I think that that was the best decision for me at the time and how you can get better at doing that yourself. Okay. So as I usually say and talk to people that ask me these kinds of questions, getting better at exploitative play really means just getting better at theory. Okay. And the reason for this is that what exploitative play means is that you're deviating from GTO in order to gain more money because you assume that your opponents are deviating from GTO in the first place. But if you don't know what the GTO solution looks like, how can you say that you're correctly exploiting your opponents? So you need to know two things. You need to know what the GTO solution looks like, and you also have to have a very good idea of how your opponents are deviating from that specific solution so that you can do then finally the third step, which is develop a counter strategy. So it's a 3-step process, right? So understand the GTO solution, understand how your opponents are deviating from it, and then building a counter strategy. That's essentially the methodology that we use in BRPC, which is my stable. And we have a few of my students here. We have Jesus here, we have Artur here. They can all tell you guys who are not from BRPC that this is how we approach things. So we have a lot of data on GTO strategy, and we try the best that we can to understand why the solution looks the way it does. Then we also do a lot of population tendency analysis to see, okay, this is the GTO, but how is actually people playing? How are humans deviating from that strategy? Because they are deviating, they're not playing all these mixed strategies correctly. If that's the case, then with those two pieces of information, we can build the proper counter strategy in order to maximize EV, which is hopefully what we're all trying to do when we're playing poker, is make the most money as possible, right? So getting better at exploiting people has to come essentially through getting better at your understanding of GTO, okay? It's possible to exploit your opponents correctly, even if you don't understand theory. I did that for a good part of my career. Basically 2017, 2018, I was playing between 100 and 200 L. I didn't really know much about GTO, and I was getting results by solely exploiting imbalances that I saw in my opponents. But that was mostly just following obvious incentives, right? So if someone overfolds, for example, and you know that by just looking at frequencies and comparing to MDF, for example, you know that they're folding too much to make bluffs profitable, you just go ahead and fire every bluff. Or if you know that they are not, for example, raising your nutted hands when they are supposed to raise, then you just increase your sizing to make more money yourself. So it's just doing things that were obvious incentives to me without necessarily knowing a lot about GTO. But as I matured, I decided to go deeper and deeper and deeper into GTO strategy. And that now allows me to do much better exploits, understand the GTO solution, have a very good awareness as well of how my opponents are playing. This you acquire basically through experience. So playing a lot and understanding how your opponents think about the game. And of course, using HUDs. HUDs are very important, I think, that people most of the time underuse. But anyways, experience in HUDs, and then with all that knowledge, you can build proper counter strategies. Okay, so we're going to have replay the hand, and hopefully this will allow you guys to understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's start here. I have pocket nines in the cutoff. I opened for 2.5x. This regular 3 bets from the small blind, pretty standard. I call. Flop is 7-5-3 rainbow. He goes ahead for a medium-sized bet around 60% pot. I call. Turn is a queen. It's an interesting card. He goes for a blocking bet around 30% pot, I think. Let me get this correctly here. 240, so 31.66% pot. I call. Turn is the ace of clubs. He checks to me. I jam, and he folds. If I remember correctly, he tanked a decent amount and folded. So what is the obvious street that I'm approaching exploitatively here? So 2 people already answered correctly. River, okay? So if you answered river, it means that you immediately recognize that very likely this hand in the GTO solution would just be a check back, right? So we have pocket nines, which is a hand that most likely has showdown value still in the spot. It's not going to have much, of course, but it is going to win a showdown at some frequency. Maybe we win sometimes against a 7. Maybe we win against a random give up. Like let's say he has King 10 of hearts and decides not to fire the river. So we have EV in the check back line. I think that's pretty obvious for everyone to see. So the GTO solution is likely to just play pocket nines as a pure check back. So now comes the following question, which is going to be the most important question for us to answer is here. Why do you guys think I play this hand as a shove? And alternatively, which would be essentially the same question, is what does villain need to be doing in order to make my pocket nines a better shove than a check? So what does he have to do in order for me to want to play nines as a shove instead of a check? So give me ideas here, and let's try to get the answer together. David said, river is GTO or GT no? Definitely GT no. We're going to take a look at the solution in a minute, and you guys are going to see that GTO played as a pure check. But why do you think that I suddenly decide to shove this here? Phoenix said, because checks too much on the ace. Checking range is too weak on the ace. That's not necessarily the best answer, right? Because a range could be, and there's actually 2 ways of countering what you're saying. So if his range is too weak, then I might even have more showdown value, right? If you're saying his range is too weak because it has more air, for example, then I have even more EV in the checking line. And even if his range is weak in a sense of only has bluff catchers, he could have a lot of bluff catchers and just decide to call with them, right? So him being too weak doesn't answer everything for us here. Artur said he needs to be over folding on the river after 3-bet and then bet check, which he is probably doing. Now Artur starts to introduce a concept here that we talk about when we're trying to exploit people, right? So he uses the word overfolding. So what he means is a reason for us turning this hand into a bluff would be if our opponent is folding more than GTO suggests. So the solution is going to have a calling range here versus my strategic option of shoving. So if you can assume that my opponent is overfolding, in other words, folding more frequently than the GTO solution suggests, then this increases the EV of shoving for me in contrast, right? So that's definitely part of the answer. Okay, so that's definitely part of the answer. Because he's going to fold all the almost indifferent bluff catchers that he bets small on the turn, such as jack stands, etc., whereas he should call those at some frequency. Very, very good, Gia. That's basically 90% of the answer here. Okay, 90% of the answer, but there is an extra 10% that actually makes a very significant difference here, okay? Okay, so folding too much bluff catchers, you have in HUD that he folds too much on the river. Yes, we can definitely use HUD in these river bet or check decisions. So, and I use hand to note HUD, for example, I think is what you all should be using because it's extremely flexible. You can build pretty much any stat that you want. And in my HUD, I have a very general stat where I group all situations where villain faced a bet on the river, regardless of whether he was the better or the caller, single raised pot, 3-bet pots. This allows me to build a bigger sample on river situations, and I can see on average whether the player folds more or less compared to other players. So using a HUD is definitely very useful in these situations, okay? But I didn't really use the HUD for this specific hand, okay? I didn't really check his folding frequency on the side to bluff because of that. Okay, so that wasn't necessarily used here, but it makes sense. My extra 10% would be that people aren't slow playing enough between turn and rivers, so his checking range is not protected. That's also a part of it, but I don't think necessarily this is going to happen on this specific texture, because I believe that for most 500 zoom regs, it's almost intuitive to, for example, play queens as sometimes a check here or aces sometimes a check. So I don't think he is necessarily capped in a sense that he never gets here with strong hands. Okay, I think this is, especially on this type of run out, I think playing queens and aces as sometimes a check is relatively intuitive for most 500 zoom regs. Definitely for the weaker ones that don't study much, this might not be the case, but this wasn't why I decided to bluff this, okay? There's an extra component here that makes this play way better than Solver suggests. You identified that many bluffs didn't get there and would increase the folding percentage, making a shove higher EV than calling. Not necessarily, Michelle, because think with me here. If I assume that his range has a lot of air give-ups, then of course, those give ups are going to check fold versus a bet. But the fact that he has all those airs in his range increased the EV of my check back as well, right? So it goes both ways. So even though he's going to be check folding more, at the same time, I just have more showdown value, more EV in the checking line. So this doesn't necessarily make me want to start bluffing with my hand, okay? What's the last piece of the puzzle? You guys are missing one last piece of the puzzle, and I'm going to give you a tip in order for us to get down to this quicker, okay? So it doesn't have to do with the river. It has to do with the turn, okay? So what's the last piece of the puzzle that, in my view at least, and we're going to hopefully show this with some simulations, what is it about the turn that could potentially be making this play way better than it should in theory? Let's see if now you guys can nail it. Fennec said, I can remember the action on the turn. So let's recap the hand quickly. So I opened, he 3-bets free, pretty standard. I call. Flop, he c-bets around 60% pot. I believe this is exactly 60%. 59%. I call. Turn is the queen of hearts, and he bets 31.66%. Okay, so he bets 31.66%. I call, and then river, he check folds. So what is the last piece of the puzzle here that, in my view, is going to make this play much better than check, or at least better enough to justify always shoving it? What is that last piece of the puzzle here? Turn blocking range isn't protected enough by really good hands. Not necessarily. Again, it could definitely be something that impacts the river strategy, but not necessarily here, because again, the strong hands are relatively intuitive for one to play here. Let's say you have king, queen, and ace, queen. You mostly want to size up and just go for stacks. The same goes for aces and kings. But if you have queens, for example, you don't want to size up with queens. So queens is very intuitive to be played as a small bet. And I think most Fajardos and Gregs are going to understand this. Does it have something to do with flush draws? No, it doesn't have to do with flush draws. So let's go back and build this together, okay? Because I think that building this together is going to be better for your understanding rather than just me throwing out the answer. So I said that Gia pretty much answered 90% of the reason here why I think this play is very good. And he said that because he's going to fold all the almost indifferent bluff catchers that he had small bet on the turn, such as jacks and tens, well as he should call those at some frequency. So he almost nailed it here because, in fact, villain is going to bet small on the turn with jacks and tens. At least the GTO strategy is going to include that small bet at some frequency with those hands. And then by the time he gets to the river, he's going to have to do something with those hands, right? Either he's going to bet again or he's going to check those hands. And if I can assume that he overfolds that region relative to GTO, if he folds those jacks and tens more often than the GTO solution allows him to, therefore the EV of my bluff increases by a lot because I'm going to get extra folds from that region. Okay, but there's an extra piece of the puzzle related to that relates to the turn. He checks them too much, so he has more than he should, so it's even better. I can't applaud because it's almost. There's just one piece. So you answered about the river. I said it has to do with the turn, right? So you said, okay, he's going to check them more on the river than he should. So he gets them with a greater proportion. And then once he overfolds, it's even better for us. That's absolutely true and awesome. But this has to do with the river. I said it has to do with the turn. Now it's easy. Come on, guys. It's easy now. Let's nail the coffin. What's the last piece of the puzzle? He's betting too thin on the turn too many times. Excellent. Gia, excellent. Gia has been studying. Very good, man. You definitely have been putting your time into the studying part. So that is the last piece of this puzzle here, okay? Because you guys are going to see, we're going to take a look at the GTO solution. Imagine he always bets jacks and tens for the block bet sizing. And then, as you're going to see on the river as well, it's a very funny solution. He always check folds with those. Then he gets with an insane amount of jacks and tens to this line. And this is going to impact our strategy in two ways. If he gets to the river with way more jacks and tens than he should, suddenly the V of checking back for us go down by a lot, right? Because he's putting more jacks and tens into his get to river range. He's betting with them more often and getting to the river more with those hands. And then once he gets the river with those hands and he checks them, which is my assumption that what people would do with those hands on the ace river, then suddenly the EV of checking back for me goes down by a lot. I just run into jacks and tens super often. And then if I can make the assumption that he folds more of those hands than he should, then the EV of betting for me goes up. Okay, so Gia absolutely nailed the answer there. And that's what we're going to take a look at the GTO solution. For this, I'm going to have to, once again, use PO Solver because we're going to play with some node locks. Hopefully soon this function will be present in GTO Wizard as well, and we can play with some node locks in the platform. Villain bets more airs than a solution, so his checking range is stronger. So 9's checking back EV is less than GTO. Villain bets more airs than solution, so his checking range is stronger. So checking back EV is GTO. Akira, that's a very good point. I don't necessarily think it. Well, it certainly should impact the situation because I can definitely perceive population over bluffing this ace river. It didn't cross my mind at the time, but you're absolutely correct. So imagine villain plays a strategy such that he over bluffs with his air on the river, meaning he give ups them way less than he should, just always fires with them. Suddenly, the VF checking also goes down to us. Okay, so this definitely impacts the river strategy. So very good point from our friend Akira here. But how can you assume that he blocks bet too much on the turn? Very good question from Fennec here. And there are multiple ways to answer this, okay? The primary, and I would say the most reliable way you can quote unquote assume, because you're going to see that it's no longer an assumption, that someone is doing something is to verify it with data, okay? So one simple thing you can do is just take a look at your HUD, take a look at your opponent's statistics. So by playing Zoom, for example, it's possible to gather a lot of sample in one individual opponent. So you can have a lot of information about his overall tendencies, which sizes he uses, how he splits his range. Again, using hand to node is extremely powerful for this because it allows us to have pretty much any kind of information at your disposal. So I can just click on my pop-up and see exactly how he splits his range between bet sizes on the turn in that specific line. I can see how often he block bets. I can see how often he sizes up. And then if I can compare this with my GTO understanding, I can assess whether he's block betting too much or too little. Okay, so that would be the first step. And second, which is what I'm mostly going to be focused with this call, is just using your experience both with regards to how the GTO solution is going to look like and how you perceive your opponents to be playing. Okay, you guys are going to see that it's very intuitive to play. It's very easy to play intuitively more small bets than the solution suggests here on this turn. So to me, I think it's very, very likely that most regulars are going to be block betting this turn a little bit too much. Okay, so it's just a combination of you having data on your opponents, but also having experience and using that experience to make assumptions, which hopefully are going to be reliable assumptions if you are experienced enough. Okay, so for sure, I think this is going to be happening here. So now let's take a look at some solutions and see all of this in practice. So this is the flop strategy here for the small blind. We see a mix between large bets and checks, which is pretty standard on these low rainbow boards. Maybe 2 years ago, most people were just betting range for 1/3 on these boards, but this has more and more and more become less frequent because it's obviously a dominated strategy. If you bet small here with all your range, you just pretty much don't make any hands in your opponent's range indifferent. The only hands that villain can't continue are high cards with hearts, right? So betting small with your entire range here is a very dominated strategy. You don't really deny equity to your opponent, so you must size up. And as you size up, given that you have a bunch of air yourself, you're not going to be able to bet entire range. So you're going to have to split your range between bets and checks. And this includes a lot of mixing with the overpair region. This is very important if you're trying to play these spots correctly, especially because you might be getting naturally exploited by your opponents if you make your checking range too weak, okay? I'm not going to be spending much time on this because we covered this in previous classes, but make sure you don't play a strategy that could be getting naturally exploited by how population plays. And population plays in a way here that if you check way too weak, you are absolutely going to get naturally exploited because people tend to bet way too merge. So take a look at pocket eights here. So we have pocket eights on a 7-high board, and pocket eights is mixing in the GTO solution 50% of checkbacks. If you suddenly play a strategy where you just bet super often with overpairs, don't check them very much, and therefore you don't threaten the imposition player with check raises as much, then these pocket eights type combos that people are betting too much are going to print way more money than they should. Okay, so make sure that on these boards, you're finding the proper amount of checks and the proper amount of check raises in order to punish strategies that are stabbing a little bit too often, which is going to be the strategy you're going to face from most people at mid stakes and below. Okay. And again, the way to do this, there's no magic pill. You have to randomize your play. Okay, so I know a lot of people kind of feel like randomizing is way too hard, but it's not. It's actually relatively straightforward. You just have to make sure you randomize some checks with these hands in order to not get exploited by population here, right? That's off topic. Let's continue. Will you show us your hand to note? I can show a few stuff. As I said in the chat in the Discord, I'm not going to be going too deep on that stuff. First of all, because it's very sensitive information, of course. It's information that we provide to my students at BIPC. And also, it's not necessarily the focus of the coaching sessions here at GTO Wizard, because of the name, we're mostly focused on GTO strategy here. But I can definitely give you guys a sneak peek. Right, so let's continue here. He bets with the medium sizing.